pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Today I have a hopefully short but definitely meandering video to make in lieu of a Bale review. So please bear with me and let me just meander. I had a buddy read planned with Catherine of Literary Prints of this short little novella by Hideo Furukawa, a Japanese novelist, called Slow Boat. I had read Furukawa's memoir, Horses, Horses, in the End, the Light. I always screw up the title. I'll put it up here. And I loved that memoir, a recounting of his experience during the 2011 earthquake and tsunami. I was living in Tokyo when that happened, by the way, so someday I'll write my own memoir. Yeah, right. I found it really beautiful and compelling and mysterious as he's driving, taking a road trip up to where he had grown up in Fukushima. Suddenly, two of the main characters from one of his novels materialize in the back seat and start talking to him. And so that was very slipstreamy, and I just thought really interesting thing to do in a memoir, and he starts talking to them, and all this Japanese history about the history of horses in Japan. It was fascinating. And it was a really good translation. I'm going to be talking solely about translated works in this video, and I didn't bother to check the names of any of the translators, which I know is a bit politically incorrect. And then I tried his novel Belka, which is about military dogs from the Japanese army that after the defeat of the Japanese were taken into the Russian army, and then it was the genealogy of those dogs through the next several decades. The concept was interesting, the history was interesting, but it was a novel. But then it got way too kind of thrillery for me, and I just couldn't read an entire novel about dogs. And I think it must have been a different translator because I wasn't in love with the prose. This novel is an homage to a short story by Haruki Murakami. And his short story is called A Slow Boat to China. And this is called Slow Boat. So in preparation for the buddy read, I read A Slow Boat to China. It was published in English in the collection The Elephant Vanishes, 1993. Interestingly, that collection was not published in Japanese until 2005. The Murakami story, A Slow Boat to China, is available for free on the internet. You just have to navigate a really weird interface to read it, and you just have to use your Google login to log into that site. I'll put a link in the show notes. I have not had much luck with short stories by Murakami. In fact, I kind of feel that I'm souring on Murakami, at least his later works. The last book of his that I completely loved was his maybe magnum opus, The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle. That's also the first one I read. I also really loved Kafka, which I think came next. So actually I should say that Kafka is the last one that I really loved. I thought Ichikyu Hachion IQ84, 1Q84 was a fascinating failure, and I hated Colorless Tsukuru and the short stories that were published in English last year, Men Without Women. I read a story and a half and they were just so, speaking of colorless, just desiccated pieces of crap, so I bailed after halfway through the second story. And I said in my review at that time that I thought Murakami needed a capacious playground of a the space of a big novel in which to play. And so I'm looking forward to his new one that's coming out. I don't know when it's coming out. Oh, this year, I believe. Yeah, I didn't realize that, or I would have put it in my books I'm looking forward to video. So anyway, with all of that in the background, I read this Murakami short story. I've never liked any of his short stories. And I have this running theory. So this is one of my meanders. I have this running theory that writers of fiction either excel at the novel or the short story, but never both. And I've done a lot of reading in my life, but I haven't done a deep comparison. But I would say Margaret Atwood's stories suck, and her novels are sometimes good. Mavis Gallant's short stories are amazing, and her novels are bad. Carol Shields' short stories were far better than any of her novels. So there's 3 Canadian women. So maybe I'm only speaking about Canadian women writers, I don't know. But I would be very interested in the comments below. Anybody that you think who writes short stories as wonderfully as they write novels. Because I have this running theory. So that has borne itself out thus far with Murakami. Then I read this story, A Slow Boat to China. I loved it. It's my favorite Murakami story. And I couldn't believe how much I loved it. It's about this guy who, I think he's doing a survey, or somebody asks him at the beginning of the story about his experience with Chinese people. So he's this Japanese guy, maybe young middle-aged salaryman. And so he's remembering 3 Chinese people he's encountered in his life in Japan. And what I thought Murakami did so well was make this a completely unracialized story. There was nothing special about any of these 3 Chinese people. There was no foreignness. Now, that is a powerful idea because in Japan, Chinese and Koreans are very racialized within Japanese culture, and there's a lot of ethnic discord going back in history and continuing to the present day. So for Murakami to write, I hesitate to use the word colorblind, but to just write this very simple story about this man's experience with 3 Chinese people, and they really weren't any different from any Japanese people that he would have encountered over the years. Except that in his mind, there's some kind of a yearning and a association with death that's very mysterious, because I couldn't quite see why, but that's why I love the story. Anyway, the second Chinese person that he talks about in the story is a young woman that when they were both university students, they worked together at this part-time job. And she was very quiet. He didn't even know she was Chinese. She's so shy that they barely speak until the end of this short-term part-time job is over, and she makes a mistake at work and starts freaking out, and he calms her down very compassionately, and she does calm down. Then he asks her out on a date. They go out on a date. It's just a very sweet, chaste date. They think they go drinking and dancing a little bit, but she has a curfew, 11 p.m. curfew, so at 10:20 he puts her on the train. I think it was at Shinjuku Station. Yes, Shinjuku Station. On the Yamanote line, I can't remember the name of the station that she was going to, asks for her phone number. She writes it on his cigarette box or something, and then she off on the train. And he's going on the opposite line on the same train line, the Yamanote line. I'll put the diagram up here. As soon as her train departs, he realizes that he put her on the wrong train. She's going to be taking the long way around, not the short way around, to get to her destination. It's going to make her late for her curfew. He feels terrible. It was just an honest mistake. So he goes to her station because it was a short journey for him going the right way on the Yamanote line to wait for her, and she gets there much later, and she's very upset. And she's crying, and she thinks that he did it on purpose or he was being mean. And they sit down and have this very sweet conversation. And he has a lot of trouble convincing her that it was just an honest mistake. And he says, "I forced words out. There are some things about myself I can't explain to anyone. There are some things I don't understand at all. I can't tell what I think about things or what I'm after. I don't know what my strengths are or what I'm supposed to do about them. But if I start thinking about these things in too much detail, the whole thing gets scary. And if I get scared, I can only think about myself. I become really self-centered, and without meaning to, I hurt people. So I'm not such a wonderful human being." Now, I don't know if you need to have read the story up to that point, or you need to be in my brain, or had all the experiences in life that I had, but I just thought that was beautiful. Almost made me all verklempt. And, knowing Japanese men as I do, that was wrenching. And I just thought it was a beautiful story. That's the one nested story. There's 3 of them. And by the end, I was just thinking, I need to focus on middle period Murakami, because this came out in the 80s or 90s originally, and not worry about his later stuff, because this story really spoke to me deeply. Okay, so there was that. Then it made me all the more excited to begin to read Slow Boat, which is an homage to that short story. So I began, and then I bailed. I absolutely hated the writing. So I read the first chapter, and I sent a Voxer message to Catherine, and I said, I want to bail! Can't we just buddy read the Murakami story? Really choppy sentences, not interesting. Now, the ideas, this is in a similar way to the protagonist of the Murakami story. This guy he's kind of rebellious. I would say he struck me as more rebellious than Murakami's protagonist, but really interesting things that he said about the Japanese language and about Japanese culture, and he was angry about this and angry about that. But the writing was just crap, really choppy prose. So in the first chapter, he's in a park. I guess it's a famous park. I've never been there. Hamalikyu Gardens. It's gardens, actually. It's supposed to be really beautiful. It was originally owned by the shogun and is quite something to see. And he sees an enclosure within which a bunch of crows have been trapped, and they're cawing uproariously, and they're about to be exterminated because there's too many crows in Tokyo. And he really feels like he wants to free them. But he realizes that if he just frees them, there's another bunch of crows will be killed in their place. Here are a few one-sentence paragraphs that I will read to you. If the law forbids it, you can't do it. That's it. End of story. The Holocaust was okay under Nazi German law. That's why my legs won't move. Why I feel empty. Alone. Dark clouds. Christmas Eve in Hamalikyu, and no one is around. Where's the rain? I wasn't so weak when I was young, but I got old. Now I always think about consequences. Through my early 20s, when I was sure justice was on my side, justice was on my side. Now I can barely utter the word justice. I just couldn't stand the prose. And even now that I read it to you, it doesn't sound that bad. So that's part of the point of this video. I came directly from this story that really touched me deeply into a chapter and a half. I did give it another half chapter before I threw the book across the room and bailed, where I just wasn't getting in at all. Like, I could see that there was some interesting stuff here, and I don't know if it's the translation, I have no idea, but I just hated it, and I thought, boy, that's not an homage, that's an insult. And this is from a writer whose memoir I loved, but didn't get along with his other novel, Belka, and this one just made me kind of sick. So I just want to end with saying, you know, I've had this negative, I've been really down on Murakami for a few years because I feel like hasn't really come out with anything interesting to me for years. And then I find this story from the 80s, and I thought his short stories were crap, and then I find this short story, and it just takes me to some deep place inside myself, or inside my inner dialogue about about Japan, about Tokyo. And then I start this other book, and I just feel like, no, this is not speaking to me at all. So, who knows? Maybe I will try this book again in a few years, and I will fall right into it. The more that I move through the world and read my way through the world, the more that I think so much of the time it's just a case of the right book at the wrong time, or vice versa. So I'm not going to write Hideo Furukawa off, but I sure didn't like the way this novel began. So please, if you're interested, check out Catherine over at Literary Prints. I think eventually she'll post a review, or maybe it will be in her wrap-up, or she'll put a comment on this video, because I know she's still reading it slowly. She hasn't finished it yet, but I don't think she was hating it. That's the meandering thoughts I had about that. It was a really kind of intense and thoughtful few hours for me, and I just wanted to share it with BookTube. Thanks for watching.